Now, before we move on to the next panel on identity and inclusion that Brad will be leading, we have a poll. If you go onto the digital platform that you're viewing on the left-hand side, there's a Q&A poll. And the first, or the question is, what would be the impact of better digital identity solutions? Transformative, significantly increasing financial inclusion, an incremental benefit, improving customer experience, or don't know. So please get your vote in there. You can see some of the audience has hopped ahead. And before I hand over to Brad, also just wanted to point out a few other features that you'll see on the platform there. On the left-hand side, you'll see the agenda, the speaker bios, a way to connect with attendees. And if you have any questions or problems, you can always reach out to meetings@if.com. A few other logistical notes. I just wanted to remind all of the panelists and the audience that this session is being recorded, as well as all of the other digital interchange sessions, and they'll be available on the IF website. And if you have live questions during this next panel, there is a Q&A function, and you'll find that on the screen as well. And please submit questions that we can put to the panel. And with that, handing over to Brad Carr, Managing Director for Digital Finance at the IF.
Thanks, Conan, and thanks, Candido, for a great discussion. As Conan says, we could have easily filled a whole hour just picking further into some of those themes. And indeed, a number of the things that Candido mentioned really resonates with a lot of our work at the IF. The series we've done on realising the digital promise together with Deloitte this year on some of the challenges and success factors in digital transformation very, very much picks up a number of the things that Candido mentioned. That point about the legacy of having a bank which is, and I think for most banks around the world, or substantial banks, a legacy of past mergers and acquisitions and having the disparate systems and how you connect beyond those and the role of cloud is all very much the things that were highlighted in our first survey on machine learning adoption in banks. But one thing I thought I might just underscore, because I think it really ties in with the discussion we're about to have, is this point about the platforms and the banks seeking to be the platform. And it's great to see the case study of Itaú, because we certainly also see a number of European case studies. The BBVA and Santander, Erste with their George platform, SEB have all been very prominent with the same notion that as we see new providers entering, if you want to maintain the centrality of the customer relationship, you perhaps want to aspire to be the platform and to, as Candido mentioned, and allow others to sell on your platform. But of course, to do that, you need to be able to do the digital identity requirements that come with the platform, which I think offers us a great segue into the discussion that we're going to have here. So if I can quickly introduce our panelists, and firstly we have Hisham Al Arab, who's the chairman of the Commercial and International Bank of Egypt, joining us from Cairo. Hisham is a long-standing and very active member in the IIF's Emerging Markets Advisory Council, very passionate about this subject, and he very generously hosted and sponsored the IIF when we had our Digital Financial Inclusion Summit in Cairo last year. Lyndon Dawson is the head of Customer Success Management for Asia Pacific at Ping Identity. She's a Pacific voice in our Atlantic Hours stream today, and she wins the dubious prize for the most inconvenienced. It's about 11:20 in the evening in Melbourne at the moment. So Lyndon, we thank you for making the sacrifice to join us. And of course, as well as her day job at Ping Identity, Lyndon's quite a prolific author on topics of data protection and security, for instance, on sites such as IT Wire. And Tilman Urbeck is the co-founder and managing partner at Flourish Ventures. Tilman was previously a partner at the Omidyar Network, where he built the global financial inclusion team, and he served for 5 years as the chief executive officer of the consultative group to assist the poor. So a great panel from diverse perspectives and diverse geographies to tackle this discussion with us. Let's start with perhaps some of the challenges. And when we see that digitalisation offers great opportunities to reach more people and to bring more people inclusively into the financial system, maybe we should start with the problem statement for inclusion and why this has historically been difficult, and perhaps where we have been making some effective progress. And Hisham, could I start with you?
Yeah, sure. The story of our life, cost. Acquiring customers the traditional way always entail a variable cost and fixed cost. And practically our colleagues who sit at, if you think about the traditional banking, who sit at the branches, they prefer to spend their time with a customer who going to deposit tens of thousands of pounds rather than a customer who will have or she will have an account that clears with very small savings there. the profitability from the account does not cover the cost of account maintenance. So banks generally and historically, they ignore the small customers until the devices, which is the mobile, shown up. Now we have a golden opportunity for inclusion, but we have to change the way we conduct business. The idea of customer coming to us and signing papers, filling forms, visiting the branch is history. And if we are serious about financial inclusion, and financial services and financial inclusion is not a gift. It's the right of each citizen is to have financial service. Then we have to provide it in a cost-efficient way through devices, which is mobile, remotely, without making the effort to move to a branch. In other words, we need to stay away from the paper and pen push. I hope that summarize the key issue about inclusion when it comes to banking. Devices are the solution for financial inclusion, which is the right for each citizen.
And Hisham, can I get you to continue with that theme a little in terms of some of the success stories that you've had at CIB, and in particular where in moving from branches to devices, that's been such an empowering point in reaching people in rural communities, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, before the COVID-19, we are requested by the regulator that customers have to sign forms. They have to fill forms. They have to come. We have to see them. We have to see their national identity. Someone have to sign next to the form that the customer signed, and they have seen the customer. That's impossible under the COVID-19, really. So they eased the regulation, and I hope that will be permanent rather than temporary, to open digital accounts. It's like mobile wallets and enrolling, what you call it, an internet banking or mobile banking. It's amazing how, I'm not talking here about the millennial generation or young people. Generally, people want a simple way to interact with the bank, a simple way that they feel safe by paying money and getting their money. And I can tell you that the financial transactions doubled up in the last 6 months. Just the number of transactions, either corporates or individuals. And the number is increasing. The acquisition of active mobile wallets is increasing way faster than what we expected. And if the regulator keep the inclusion or providing financial services without the paper and pen push for certain segments, small accounts and remote customers, I think this will be the breakthrough for financial inclusion, because the idea here is not about just payments. Payments will lead to behavior. I can talk about this further. People who receive money and spend money, we depend on their data to start to provide them with other services. That's how we start to make the accounts profitable, and we start to provide better service for that segment. Not all the customers are the same, but I can tell you, I'm really impressed by people who different from blue collar to white collar to people who never had bank account. They started to use the wallet and the remote connectivity in order to onboard into our, because the wallet makes you a bank customer, but remotely. By having their history there at the bank, in few months' time, we'll start to provide them with other services. Those services could be insurance, could be not only saving, but lending as well.
So you make a great point there that it's not just payments and that it extends into those other areas of finance. Tillman, if I could bring you into the conversation at this point, and I think you would also take the view that it's not just financial services and that there's a broader range of both challenges and opportunities to extend that into a broader ecosystem of different touch points and services.
Yeah, very much agree with that. So I do think the crisis, the lockdown has shown us all that digital identity is a very critical element to conduct our lives. We were trying to work from home, shop from home. Courts are sitting digitally, marriages are being concluded digitally. So this entire notion of digital identity is a far bigger topic than financial inclusion, if you will. At the same time, financial inclusion is a far bigger topic than digital identity. Digital identity is a critical enabler to promote financial inclusion. It lowers costs, it makes things easier, it allows financial services providers to comply with regulation. But in order to really reach people who have previously been excluded, you also need the right products, the right services at the right cost. They must actually help them improve their lives. So digital identity, hugely important in the times that we are living, a bigger topic than just financial inclusion, and within financial inclusion, a necessary but not sufficient condition for success.
Lyndon, if I can turn to you, and I think one of the points you've raised with me before was about the notion of no user left behind. And I want to make a linkage here to a comment that Carlos Torres Villa, BBVA's chairman, made in our Monday session about the criticality of ensuring that digitalisation does not leave behind the most vulnerable. So I guess we kind of have this sense of, on one hand, there's the great positive story of the opportunity to use digitalisation to reach people that have otherwise been historically excluded, some of what Hisham was talking about and expanding that reach. But there's also, I guess, the risk or the negative that we need to make sure we avoid, that we don't digitalise in a way that excludes some people who are currently part of the network. I know it's something that the Swedes and the Canadians have talked a lot about, with the criticality of ensuring that the underlying technical infrastructure is there to support. But I'm wondering if I can get your views here.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a previous role, I was the head of identity, trust and safety at Australia Post, and I was responsible for clearing the path forward for a digital ID product. And we had, because we were a government-owned enterprise, so this becomes particularly relevant for government agencies or anyone dealing with government. It's everyone, everywhere, every day. And so for me, inclusion isn't just socioeconomic, who has a device, who hasn't got a device, who's got the internet, hasn't got the internet. It isn't just geographic, which of course digitisation has improved the situation. If you take, say, Indonesia, for example, I was working with a bank transformation over there, and Indonesia is really a collection of islands. And so they're leapfrogging ahead with a lot of their digital transformation because they can go straight to, they'll go to mobile rather than building bricks and mortar. So it's not just socioeconomic or geographic, it's also thinking about all of the users and how they engage with the platform, and making sure that when you're building your platforms, and I've seen this from a very practical sense, down in the trenches with the teams, the identity and access management teams who are building and transforming large banks, making sure that you're conducting user testing all the way along, and that the teams who are building these and undergoing the transformation are as diverse as the user base. Otherwise, you can risk building something that suits only one cohort of your customer base.
It's a really important point, and it's one that I think is often talked about in the realm of machine learning and artificial intelligence, but probably not always given sufficient focus in other areas of design. We've heard a number of leading practitioners in the US talk about, if you're walking into a room of developers that are working on an AI program, you want to ensure that there is some ethnic and lifestyle variances amongst those people. And in fact, Kathy Besant at Bank of America tells the great story about how she learned to drive in Michigan, where the message was, when you're driving in the ice and you see a deer on the road, you don't swerve to avoid the deer. Probably a bit like you and I learned about kangaroos on the road in Australia. and it troubles her when she sees autonomous vehicles being taught and programmed by people who have spent their whole lives living in cities. But it's a reminder, I think, that we need to have that same principle in mind beyond necessarily algorithms, but all parts of the user experience, right?
Yeah, and all parts of the digital transformation journey. So as say a bank is engaging on, and I certainly work with a lot of banks who are going through the migration from the, as Candido was talking about, the migration of, from the old legacy stacks, these kind of Frankenstein systems that are holding silos of data that are of no use to anyone and probably a security risk. And they're going through this process of migrating them onto the new stack, making sure that in that process, you're thinking about all of the users that will be affected in that process. So at a very practical level, you need diverse teams and lots of user testing. So diverse user testing all the way along. User testing isn't something you just sort of add on at the end and hope everyone likes it. It's something that you have to test and learn all the way through.
I'd like to continue in a moment with the theme of perhaps identifying some of the success stories. And you mentioned the case, Lyndon, about working with an Indonesian bank. But perhaps I'd like to get some views across the panel around the role of identity as a cue for broader participation in the economy, and maybe not just at the consumer level. And Tillman, perhaps I'll turn to you first here, but thinking of how SMEs are able to participate in this new economy that's been so rapidly and dramatically accelerated through the COVID period. I think of, for instance, an SME that has suddenly had to reinvent itself as an e-commerce business. And in some cases, it's not just identifying that the customer is someone whose money you can take and that the payment works. Sometimes you need to be able to identify that they are an eligible customer. For instance, if you're selling alcohol or something that's got an age restriction attached to it. And how you do that with no longer in-person transactions and no longer in-person identity. Some of the solutions like the Open Digital Trust Initiative, I think, are really critical about helping to enable that and provide that as a basis for SMEs activity in the broader economy in this world. But please, can I get your thoughts on that, Tillman?
Yeah, if you think about, again, how you conduct your life, right? You have your wallet, and in the wallet is your credit card, so there's a payment mechanism, but there's also the driver's license that proves your age. If you want to buy alcohol, in at least in the United States, you have to be 21 in most places. In a physical store, you have your health insurance card in there, all that type of stuff. As we increasingly live in a digital world, and that is true before the pandemic, and that's true in emerging markets, and that is true for small businesses and consumers, the more we could use that information that used to be in my physical wallet, the more we could use that in a digital way, the easier life gets for us as users and consumers, and obviously for the businesses on the other side providing the services. And we really should have a regime. I would love to hear more from Lyndon about this. We really should have a regime that includes everybody, a digital identity regime that includes everybody. That was already mentioned. I think it should be a regime as well that is very transparent. So if somebody authenticates my identity, I should know about that. It should protect my privacy, right? It should only pull the type of information that is really needed. So for example, or the example that resonates a lot with people is the buying alcohol, right? It should only be proven the fact that I'm 21. They don't need to know my birth date exactly, my address, my telephone number, so that they can harass me afterwards. So these notions of inclusivity, transparency around the usage, privacy of the data, proportionality, and then it needs to be interoperable, right? So right now we have this multitude of different things that we need to use, and that's costly, it's replicative. So I do think there is a sort of digital identity regime to be developed, and it has a public utility character to it, in my interpretation. And that's why initiatives like Trust Canada or Trust Frameworks in the US, in the UK, everybody is working on that. And that's, from my perspective, that's the right way to go.
Tillman, you've pretty much described exactly what we're, the IF and the Open ID Foundation are working on as part of the Open Digital Trust Initiative. And indeed, to your point about a small business, for instance, doesn't want to necessarily learn a customer's date of birth, because then they have to store that and protect that. And there's depending on your jurisdiction, potentially some very large fines pending if you don't sufficiently protect that. It reminds me of the analogy about data that Scott Farrell from the Australian Consumer Data Right study gave, which is that it's not the new oil, it's the new uranium, that it has a half-life, that it decays, but it's toxic and you need to protect it and store it. So the scenario where a trusted identity provider, which might be, for instance, a bank, is able to validate a customer with an answer of yes, rather than the actual date of birth, I think is something that is potentially very powerful and enabling for a small business. Tillman, you gave a cue to Lyndon there. Perhaps if I can let Lyndon react, and then Hisham, if we can come to you, because I'm sure that the SME sector is a very important one for you also. But Lyndon.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely agree with everything that you were saying. I think that is a dream goal to have an interoperability globally, to have something that can be transparent, some standards that people are all working to, but that still has the flexibility to recognise cultural differences between nation states, different policies, different laws. I think the key to that, really at its core, sort of philosophically, is that you have to put the user in the centre of everything, and you have to give them control, you have to give them choice. You have to allow them to see at a more fine-grained level what it is they're agreeing to and what they're not agreeing to, and you have to give them the right to be forgotten or the right to withdraw their consent. There are some challenges around folks who aren't in a position to give consent, so say children or people who may have to engage in delegated authority, so if they're the very elderly, for example. So there are some cases that do need to be addressed in that way, but I think somewhere where we can put the user in the centre and allow people that choice would be ideal. That would be amazing. But certainly from my experience working at Australia Post, one of the big challenges was who will own the risk? So I can create this great digital identity platform, but will the bouncer on the other side accept that as an appropriate yes, no, this person is legally allowed to come into the nightclub? It's who catches it on the other side is really important, and will they be protected by government regulations? That's the $1 million question, I think.
That's a great point. Hisham, would you like to add to that, and particularly with the lens of where at CIB you not only are committed to extending the reach for your consumer customers, but also the way that you support small business?
I want to add one point about the digital identity before I move to that point. It's not only about the personal data, it's about personal behavior as well. It's like 360 degrees holistic look at the individual that becomes very hard, even if people have the same birthday, almost the same name, to mix them up because of the different behavior. The most trusted place where you can have the entire data, I think the banking sector is where historically, and I think in the future would be the right place where they can preserve the customer secrecy and the customer data. Moving to how to use the data there, either individuals or small businesses, the biggest challenge that private small businesses have is that when they deal with banks, they deal with banks who don't understand very much how the small business run their operation. And fortunately, their off-takers or suppliers, they know them better than their bankers. The banker have all the information about them, but their behavior is much better understood by the supplier and the off-taker. So I think moving the credit part of financing SMEs from just a cash flow and projection to payment and behavior is very important, because this is exactly how suppliers give facility to their small businesses, or off-takers give them advances for their business. And unless banks move their business lending model from the traditional corporate lending to a behavior lending, as if I'm a small business, even if the cost is higher, I would rather prefer to get my financing from my supplier or off-taker who we have been dealing together for many years rather than borrowing from banks. It's quite complicated, the SME financing. From our side at CIB, when we looked at SME, we looked at what's missing there is the financial services, payment, payrolls, because most of the SMEs, the majority of their business is in cash. So the first step is to understand their behavior is moving that cash into the bank, like the point of sales. Rather than selling cash, you sell through point of sale. Rather than paying your employees in cash, you pay them through the wallet to their straight to their account. Then we build information, and this is what we call it an SME, the identity. It's another behavior identity for that small business, the same like the individual.
So I think you're really making the point there that the linkage of identity services as an enabler for other areas of credit assessment, other areas of bank activity is a really important one. And I think where you make the point about the SME sector in particular, and I guess it's always been a challenging sector to lend to because of the information asymmetries. But Hisham, you remind me of some comments that Josephine Anon Ankabar from EcoBank in Ghana made on one of our recent webinars, where they'd been able to study the patterns of their large corporates as well as their SMEs and establish where there were linkages and where there were clearly supplier contracts in place, and able to rely on that perhaps as a stronger signal of the SME's activity and creditworthiness perhaps than some of the traditional metrics. So I think it's great that you highlight some of the opportunity in that space.
Right,
Well, please, Tillman. Yeah.
I'm really glad that you elevated this discussion, and I really appreciate Hisham's point just now. So, I mean, in emerging markets, a large majority of MSMEs, right, or MS, I should say, micro small businesses, are really operating in the informal economy for a number of reasons. But their lives and their underlying business is digitizing, and that happened already pre-COVID, and it has accelerated now. And what that does is it does just create a visibility that allows to proxy cash flows that did not exist before. So I'll give you an example. We are an early stage investor, right? And we invest in innovations that try to capture these opportunities. So in Bangladesh, we invested in a startup that initially helped small micro entrepreneurs, often women who culturally are expected to work from home. Initially, they helped them create an online presence on Facebook, WhatsApp, because those are actually the marketing channels. And then they realized that in order to deliver the services, these entrepreneurs needed a logistics service, the delivery of the good, and then the collection of cash on delivery. And they realized between doing the marketing on Facebook and doing the logistics, we actually have a very good view of the entire business. And that is valuable data along the lines of what Hisham is describing, that allows you to underwrite. And now there is working capital that's being extended that a traditional bank could never have been underwriting. So I guess what we are trying to say here is there's a huge opportunity because of the digitization of much of our lives. And that is true for everybody, individuals, businesses, small businesses, emerging markets. And in order to capture that, we need a far more inclusive and modern 21st century digital infrastructure. And that includes real payments that Candido mentioned. It includes a broader data regime. Identity is just a part of that. And once we have all that in place, right, we can collectively unlock enormous upside.
I'm going to call on the polling question that we had earlier. Sorry, Hisham, I'll come to you in just a second. Thank you. But you got a sneak preview of the live poll from the audience earlier, and if we just show you the updated results, I think it probably helps to underline the point that Tillman was just making there, that identity is transformative, that it is not necessarily the end in itself, but rather a critical enabler that helps to underpin the transformation, the digitalization across the industry more broadly. Sorry, Hisham, you were about to jump in.
No, no, I just wanted to add that the part of the digital infrastructure, the ecosystem is, we should not ignore the quality of the infrastructure, the connectivity, and the costs as well, because it's good to have the connection to the far remote areas of many of the emerging markets or a country like Egypt. But if the connection cost is quite high, like in Africa in general, the connectivity cost is extremely high, way higher than the Europe and the US and Latin America and Asia, and must come down. The connectivity cost must come down, because that's the only way you will encourage people to use it's their digital right, okay, to have a cheap connectivity and reliable connectivity. This is the only way you can talk about digital economy. You can talk about digital service generally. Without a reliable network and at reasonable price, it becomes very difficult to talk about digitalization.
Lyndon, I want to change gears slightly. One of the points that you'd raised with me when we were chatting in the lead up to today was about that it's not just about including people that are able to come in and be parts, not notionally, or at least be registered on the network, be identified, but how you can actually really embed them and give them a genuine experience of genuinely wanting to be part of the network, be more connected. And that may elaborate a little bit further on some of the points that you and others have already raised here, but just wondered if you could perhaps touch on that and explore that a bit further for us.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Brad. The idea of inclusion, I think you can extend that even further to this sense of belonging. So what you really want is your users to feel like they belong on your platform. And certainly a lot of the work that I do is almost plumbing in the wall. It's a security software. It's there to protect the user's data, and hopefully they never need to know that there's a breach, they never just see the plumbing in the wall. But there's also this huge opportunity to develop, particularly around as consumers come on, they're onboarding, they're registering themselves, they're authenticating themselves. There are these great opportunities to do this in a seamless way, so that you have, as the bank has the business owner, have a very high level of assurance that that person is who they say they are, up to a certain level, and our levels of assurance will vary, and the risk profile goes up or down in relation to that. But once you have a high level of assurance that a user is who they say they are, then you can build that customer experience for them in a way that is just seamless, and then they'll feel as though they really belong with you, and then they belong with your brand, and then you have that opportunity to gather more data from them in a respectful way, and then you can commercialize that additional knowledge and personalize and upsell. And I think that's where a lot of certainly the marketing, the CMOs of the world are heading. They're colliding, I guess. What I'm seeing in the real world is the CMOs are colliding with the CIOs, and the two that play together will be successful in the end.
It's an interesting point, and certainly where we've been at the IF at the moment, we're currently assembling our new steering committee on digital finance. And as we've been reaching out to our members around the world and identifying chief digital officers and chief innovation officers as the right kind of profile for that group, we have found a couple of cases where it's chief digital and marketing officer. And whilst obviously the chief digital officer role, or that notion, is not one that's vanilla in its prescription around the world, the fact that a few firms are very much thinking along the lines that you describe really highlights that point.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a little trick to that, and that's because marketing is seen as a way to make money. So marketing will have a budget that your security and your CIO folks don't have. So think about different parts of the business that can fund a digital transformation.
Getting out of that cost center conundrum.
Yeah.
I do want to do a round across all of our panelists in a moment, just to get sort of a final sense of challenges and ways of overcoming. But Hisham, I wasn't sure if you wanted to react just to the point that Lyndon had made about the integration of the customers and that sense of belonging and the opportunities that sparks. Because I think her comments there really aligned very much with where you started this discussion for us, and the fact that it's more than just payments and the linkages beyond that.
Yeah, it's very much like you have to build a trust in it's part of trust as part of the ecosystem. And it's a trust about the reliability of the network, it's a trust about your counterparty, it's a trust about your bank, it's a trust about the other side you are providing information to. I have to say that everyone was complaining about the COVID-19. Yes, it's a danger for our life and everything, and it's a sad thing. However, for our business and for the digital era, it's proven with no doubt that if the speed of implementing connectivity and digitalization of businesses and government services was at 1, we need to move to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, even faster than what we used to do before. And if it wasn't for the COVID-19, many things that are happening this year would not have happened until year 2023 and 24.
Yep. I think that's absolutely right. And I often quote Megan Green, Harvard economist, some remarks that she gave last year about how historically every technological innovation has taken something like 25 years to show up in productivity data, and that was the case with the PC, that's typically because of the fact that humans take the time to adapt and really embed and be able to use the technology effectively. And I do wonder whether the forced adaptation scenario that we've encountered this year might be something that breaks what's historically been that behaviour. In the time that we have left, I want to do a very quick round across each panelist, and I'm sorry I'm going to rush you here, but perhaps if we could just go for 1 or 2 minutes with each of you, your sense of the challenges that remain and perhaps opportunities for how we overcome those. If I could start with you, Tillman.
Yeah, I see pretty much opportunity, similar to Hisham. We see an acceleration. It's not the question of any longer why we need this type of modern infrastructure. It's a question of how do we get there. I mentioned earlier that there is a utility character public utility character to this for me. We still need the government to provide the original source document, right? The driver's license, the national ID. At the other end, government is the one that says if you sell alcohol to somebody under 21, we will come after you. So it's a two-sided marketplace. It's a utility. It requires a collective effort across private and public sector. The right platforms, the right norms, open API, secure, privacy protecting. Banks, I do believe you mentioned that earlier, but banks can provide can play a big role in that, but I doubt banks can be the only players. We need a broader coalition. And these coalitions are coming together because, as I said at the outset, it's not a question anymore of why, but now it's a question of how.
Lyndon, can I get you to add to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the challenges are that as we get really smart, the fraudsters get just as smart. So I know it's been referred to as an arms race, but there's a constant battle, particularly at the intersection of humans and technology, where end users meet our systems, and human end users are deliciously flawed. So I think there's there will continue to be a lot of work in the fraud prevention, the risk and governance space. I've certainly seen a lot of effort in the banks that I work with in that space, and I think that will continue to grow. But the opportunities are just huge. You know, just being able to have a chat with my parents who are in their 70s on Zoom when they keep changing their backgrounds, and they think that's fantastic. But the way that that's opened up to a broader, and I agree, COVID has certainly been the Kickstarter for that, but the way that it has opened up the digital world to a broader audience, and the opportunity, I think, that you were referencing before, you guys were talking about, you know, sole traders, women who are creating crafts in Bangladesh or in outer regions of Asia, who can now stay home, create and build and then sell all the way across the world is an extraordinary opportunity for inclusion in an economy that perhaps they were never part of.
Thank you. It's a great point. And Hisham, I'll give you the final word.
The final word is the big challenge is regulation. The regulators and governments, this across the world, need to rethink about the current regulation and how can they deregulate so they allow the digital era really and sincerely to be fully implemented. We cannot afford, we don't have the luxury of time anymore. It's not because of the COVID-19, because the world is changing. Really, if you want to create jobs, help people in the remote areas, it's their right to be included digitally and financially as well. And the only way that will happen is by deregulation, allowing better competition, allowing as well innovation rather than protectionism.
So thank you, Hisham. Thank you all our panelists, Lyndon and Tillman. Been a great discussion. Underlined a couple of points that I'll just quickly emphasise. One is interoperability. That's a word we've heard a couple of times through the discussion, and certainly in the work that the IF's doing on the Open Digital Trust Initiative, it's one that we emphasise. We probably started out thinking of that in interoperability with other identity systems, and we found that it's actually also the multiple layers of interoperability with some of the other capabilities and different databases and different systems, different applications. And I think that probably leads to the other point I'd like to emphasise from the discussion, that identity is a transformative enabler for a lot of other things. That identity is not necessarily the end in itself. It can do a lot of fantastic things directly in inclusion, but it's perhaps at its most powerful where it's able to be a critical enabler for leveraging the digital promise in other areas of the broader economy. So thank you, Hisham. Thank you, Lyndon. Thank you, Tillman. Great discussion. And I'm going to hand back to my colleague, Conan French, to wrap up for today.
Great, thanks for everyone running through what's a really critical topic, and a special thanks also to Hisham for seconding Amin Khairi to the IF for the past 2 years, who led a lot of our digital inclusion and identity work. Looking forward, in 11 hours, we'll have our final session of the digital interchange, and this one will be on RegTech. We'll start off, I'll have a conversation with Septemdu Mohanty, who's the Chief FinTech Officer at the Monetary Authority in Singapore. And then we'll move on to a panel that we're doing in partnership with the RegTech Association. Also looking forward, we have the IF annual membership meeting that will be coming up. We'll have a number of sessions that will run from October 12th to the 16th. So watch for that and be sure that you're signed up. And thank you very much for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you in 11 hours and again in October. Have a good day.